Hi, thank you for tuning in. I hope you caught the last two episodes. A lot of good information in there for you. In today's episode, I'm going to be discussing the issue around pricing for land. We get the question a lot, how do I know that your price is fair? How do I know if it's too high? No one really wants to know if it's too low, because that's a good thing, right? You want to buy for pennies on the shilling. But how do I know I'm not overpaying for land? That's what I'm going to cover with you today. You're watching On Land in Kenya. I am Solomon Wangwe. So the issue of pricing, especially with regards to land, it's a bit amorphous. And I say that because, if you're dealing with commercial land, commercial spaces, residential spaces, these are typically in urban areas where pricing is fairly well defined. There's a lot of data out there through agencies, through consultants, the Haas Property Index, the Knight Frank Property reports. These are all good references. And it's not difficult to just take a drive down a street, call a for sale sign, or call the agency and ask about the price of a particular piece of land and compare it to others, and you can get a good sense for what the pricing is supposed to be. However, when it comes to land, it's a bit less defined, especially if you're going to invest in land in places like we prefer to. These are usually very frontier parts of the country, agriculturally zoned because they are freehold properties, and very often you and I will be new entrants into the area. We'll be buying land from the original local inhabitants, whether it's a Maasai in Kajiado or Nanyuki or the Kikuyu as well. You're typically buying from the first person to own the land after the government of Kenya either allocated it to them or sold it to them some time ago. So how do you know if the price is right? And these are some of the ways you can use to gauge. First one is fairly simple. It requires a little bit of sweat equity. You just have to ask around, call people. I mean, we often spend days driving around an area, knocking on Manyata doors, asking a particular landowner what they will accept for their land. And it's not uncommon to find that even they don't know what to ask for their land because there is no data for them. Very often it's based on how much they need, and sometimes that can be good because you're paying lower than you might if someone is asking for more. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to what is the opportunity cost for you, right? We, for example, have often overpaid, as it were, for land for different reasons. We looked at one piece of land, I remember, in the Konza area. The owner wanted a particular price for the land, and after, I think a few days later, the neighbor who happened to be wanting to sell also asked for a price for their land. These two pieces of land were sharing a boundary, and one owner was asking almost double what the other was. So in that situation, if you're simply going to focus on the price or the cost to you, it's a no-brainer. You go with the cheaper guy. But in this case, the guy who was asking for slightly more, almost double more, had complete documentation for his land. The other party did not. This other owner was in agreement with his two wives about selling the land. All the adult kids were consenting to it. There were no issues. There was no strife with the family. In the other instance, the wife didn't really know what was going on. She wasn't educated, and so she would not be able to have understood the conversations we were having anyway. But we got a real sense that this gentleman was selling off the land without his wife's express permission. So in that instance, we made a decision to pay more for the land that had cleaner documentation than the one that did not. So some of these factors come into play when you're considering making an investment in land. We very often are in areas where our neighbors are selling land just like we are, and some will sell for more than we do. In Nanyuki, for example, there are a number of parties who will sell their land, in some cases smaller sizes, for much more than we're asking for ours. But their buyers know them personally. They trust them. They know what they're about. They may not know who we are. They may not know what we're about. And in Kenya, that's a real factor. Trust means a lot because of the environment that we invest in. And so their buyers will happily pay 50% more for their land than they will be comfortable paying to us. I'd rather pay more to someone I know I can hold accountable than paying less to someone who may not have my best interests at heart. So these are some of the issues that come up when you're figuring out land pricing in Kenya, and it can be tricky, I understand. But there's no shortcuts. You simply have to engage the market, ask around, make your decisions based on actual information that you have firsthand, as opposed to getting it from a third party who may not have your best interest at heart. So good rule of thumb, just spend time and engage. Another great way to kind of gauge the price of land in Kenya is to find out what the government valuation is. And there's a caveat to that. Government valuations, and this is true, all over the world in our experience, because we've invested in property in the States as well. Government valuations are usually referred to as tax valuations, and very often they are a fraction of market valuation. So if I sell you a piece of land for, say, 1 million shillings for an acre, the land valuation may come in at somewhere around 500 or 600,000 shillings. And so if you're asked to pay for stamp duty based on the government valuation, you might wonder why you're paying 1 million shillings. And that is normal. Government valuations are typically, in some cases, even 40% of market valuations. Market valuations are based on what buyers are willing to pay. We have often lost opportunities to buy land simply because someone else was willing to pay 3 times more than we were negotiating for, that the seller was willing to accept, but someone else was willing to spend 3 times more simply because they knew what value they were going to derive from that property. And at that point, a new market valuation has been set, right? And that is very often independent from government valuations. Although it's a good way to get an indication if you factor in the fragmentation or the ratio difference, but keep that in mind, that market valuations are very different from government valuations. I hope that information helps. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us. You can send us an email to inquiry@goshenacquisitions.com. You can engage with us on YouTube and subscribe, please do, or check us out on Facebook as well. You're watching Own Land in Kenya. I am Solomon Wangwe. Stay tuned for more information on strategic land investment.